Well, where on earth do you start with this one? It's said a lot as hyperbole, but quite literally every single game of round 26 delivered. There were completely enthralling contests wherever you look. From Steve Corica's first time up against the Sky Blues back in Sydney, rattling back a draw from another Adrian Segecic finishing masterclass, to the Newcastle Jets laying down the absolute hammer on the Mariners in an F3 derby that'll set the tone for pre-season on both sides. Then you've got the Wanderers proving they can actually defend, a hapless Adelaide United sinking even lower away to Perth, as well as the Phoenix and Raw giving an almighty scare to either side of the Melbourne divide. Sydney and Adelaide dropping points mean the Bulls are suddenly all of a sudden back in the race for finals. Auckland still have just enough breathing room up top thanks to Western stumble, but it does blow the race for the Champions League position wide open. We say it all the time, but it really is the best league in the world, and it is ours. So let's drink it all in on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil. Joining me tonight is Christian Montegan. Christian, it's usually, maybe there's one or two games kind of competing hard for top of the bill when we do the rundowns for these podcasts, but there was a pretty good showing across all six outings this weekend.
Yeah, there was plenty to choose from. It's not like previous weeks where, like you said, we've been struggling to, find our marquee fixture. There's just been a few rounds where, we've been a bit lost at sea. But I think it just proves that the league is just exciting, right? Like anything can happen. And we've said that time and time again this season. So I actually reckon this podcast episode is going to be one of our most interesting because now finals are starting to heat up. We're really starting to see that bigger picture in terms of that top six and who's going to finish first. So, a lot to talk about.
Jacob Stevens, good evening to you as well. There is plenty to talk about. One little preview I'll give for Friday later in this week, because we're kind of at a point now where all those top six kind of seven teams, or even eight if we want to count the Bulls as well, they've all got 3 games to go. So they're all at a very even point. So we're going to try and rank all those fixtures and try to determine what the difficulty of them is to see where this table might actually somehow finish up. But it's a pretty difficult exercise trying to predict the A-League.
I think because even though these teams are, the top 6, 7, 8 teams in the league, and we're thinking who's going to make finals or not, even they're unpredictable in what they're going to, do on the pitch every week. So it's not just the fact that, the difficulty of their opponents is going to be different. It's how difficult they make it for themselves that's going to change as well. So yeah, it's been a crazy season. So it's good to see it, sort of continue on a little bit. And it makes things super exciting coming into the back end of the season now.
It's been a high-scoring season as well. This round, we ticked over 500 goals in the league to date at the start of the season, which is after 150 games, which is when they eclipsed it, is a record in men's National League history in Australia that's been captured for data for 48 years. That is the quickest that the men's national top division has ever reached 500. We kind of talked about the dilemma of, is that exciting, is that poor defence before? But either way you look at it, Christian, that is a lot of goals.
Oh, you can't say it's poor defence because Adelaide have conceded half of those goals. So, I mean, I think you can't read too much into that, I don't think. But no, in all seriousness, I think we've had this conversation in years past, right, where there's been heaps of goals and we've averaged like 3-4 goals a game. And it's like, is the league entertaining or is it a case of poor defending? And I've sort of been like always on the fence with it. Because we have always seen the attacking talent that's there, and we do know now that, especially this season, a lot of youth, there's inexperience. Obviously, there are going to be mistakes in the back line, so it is to be expected, right? But that's not to diminish the fact that, there is quality in the final third, right? There's no denying it, with the talent, especially in that top 6. So, I mean, I think it's a conversation we always have. But what do you think, Jacob?
Well, I think it's a case of it's been very, very poor defending, but that's what's made it entertaining, right? Is that like, I think both things can be true at the same time. Like if the defending was really good, yes, we'd still have moments. I mean, you look at those Segecic goals, right? Like just fantastic hits where it's like against a good defense, they're probably still going in, but you're not getting, 6-7 goals a game as we've seen in some of these ones, in some of these fixtures, because the defending is, at a reasonable standard for the level of competition. I do think that it's been pretty poor this season, just across the board. Most teams haven't seemed to get it right. There's been lots of goalkeeper errors as well. But then, that means that there is lots of goals, and there's these games with these crazy score lines where it just feels like the momentum is shifting every 10, 15 minutes every time a goal's scored. So, I think that it's been entertaining, but it's been entertaining because the defending has been so poor. So, I think with better defending, maybe we wouldn't have had so many chaotic games. There might have been some closer ones, perhaps. But, I also think that, it can be entertaining even if it's not particularly fantastic football that's on the pitch.
I mean, if you look at the context of it, you look at the context of it, like how many poor teams are there in this league that you can compare to previous seasons? Like, is this like one of the worst seasons in terms of that? Like, you have Perth, Brisbane Roar, you've got the Mariners who have been pretty much terrible. You've got the Phoenix who have been a shadow of themselves from last season. Like, there's a few teams in there that...
Adelaide with the worst fall-off in the history of the league.
Exactly. I'm just trying to think back to another season where there's been that many poor sides.
It's tricky because that top 8 is so condensed, right? But the fall-off is big. And, as you say, throw in Adelaide United second half of the season, and there's just been... there probably has been a big gulf, but also those teams can get wins on occasion. So... it's an interesting point. Well, one team that definitely can't be criticised for their defensive efforts is Auckland, right? They had this big record at the start of the season, going without conceding a goal, and those specific 5 players that we talked about last week finally had their defence breached against Brisbane. It happened here again this week, but in slightly different circumstances, Christian. It was Steve Corica's return to Sydney Football Stadium to play Sydney FC, a small little classifier of a neutral game and Unite round there as well. But they turned up really hoping to take advantage of Sydney FC and their fixture congestion and try and break this run of draws that they have. It wasn't quite meant to be on this occasion, but a pretty impressive turnaround after going 2-0 down, which we'll get to. They brought a few hundred from the port with them. It was a really cool atmosphere inside Sydney Football Stadium. But we started, with the news before the game as well. I think a lot of people were watching out for what team Tele would select, knowing that they've just come back from Singapore. They have to play another leg on Wednesday night. I think probably it's easy to say in retrospect, but I think Steve Corica got it pretty right. Patrick Klimala missed with a little niggle, so he was gone anyway. But Douglas Costa, who is probably the first candidate for a little bit of a break, goes out. Adrian Segecic obviously is very deserving of a start anyway, and it's why Heem comes in as well. So a slight bit of rotation just to ease the legs a tiny bit, but still plenty of strength out there, and it was a great game between these two sides.
Yeah, definitely. I think the rotation obviously was going to be a big question mark heading into this game because, again, like I said last week or the week before, like Sydney are in a position where they can't really afford to muck around in terms of their starting lineup, right? Given the position they're in terms of fighting for finals, right? So it doesn't give them that wiggle room to, to rest players, rotate a bit, experiment. You just can't do that if you want to make these finals because it's just so tightly congested. So they chucked Joe Lolly up front with Segecic, up top with Casera sort of sitting in behind, doing a bit of everything. But yeah, I thought like Segecic in particular, like that first half, those first 2 goals, like he's just an absolute talent. He just sort of carried them really in that final third. Those 2 really, I guess, identical strikes from outside the box. They were world class, to be honest. Just really good strikes, and I think it goes to Sydney's season as to although they don't play well at times in terms of consistency, they have these little moments where they can pick apart a side. They can use whether it be Douglas Costa, Klimala, Segecic to just literally pick something out of absolutely nothing and produce that type of quality, which has really saved them in a lot of games this season. I think we saw that again in the first half over the weekend, and I thought Steve Corica didn't do much wrong in terms of how he set up, his Auckland side. Heading in, I just thought that the strikes are you just got to put your hand up sometimes and say too good, right? But I thought the character Auckland showed in the second half was really positive. To claw their way back into the game. Obviously scored the first goal towards the end of the first half to try and get themselves back into it. I just think I've just been really impressed with the character that they've showed so far this season for such a new side. First season in the competition, and obviously Corica's experience. He knows Sydney inside out. I thought he managed the game well at the end. Thought, okay, we've fought so hard to get this point away from home. We don't want to do anything silly and give away a point. So I think he'll be happy with it. Even Sydney, to an extent, will be happy, I think, with the draw, given the circumstances playing in Asia the week before, in Singapore, and now having to play this return leg in Wednesday, as you mentioned, Lockie. So I think all in all, both teams will be, I guess, pretty positive, although Sydney, at this stage, they need as many 3-pointers as possible because, it's really close in that top 6 fight.
Jacob, there's probably not too much more we can say about Adrian Segecic and the impact that he's had this season, but here are some of his numbers, right? So with that brace on the weekend, he's now equal in the Golden Boot with 12 goals, equal with Archie Goodwin. But the difference here is that Adrian has only played a touch over 1,100 minutes this season, which ends up being about a goal every 90 minutes. And Goodwin is the next best in that statistic at 120 minutes per goal. So that is a massive difference for someone, especially who's been coming off the bench a lot. More than half of his league appearances are off the bench. And just to come out, just every time, his club needs him pretty much. And then to put this kind of quality, as Christian said, I think maybe Alex Paulson would have liked to save the second one on a better day, but they're pretty good strikes, and the first one especially was unstoppable.
Yeah, what more can you say about him? Honestly, I think he's having the kind of season that a lot of people perhaps were hoping Aaron Kunda was going to have last season, where it's just every single time. Like, don't get me wrong, Aaron Kunda had a great season, but it's like every time Segecic is on the pitch, he scores. And that's I wish I was making that up because it just sounds insane, but it's so true. And if he's not scoring, he's at least involved in some way in a fantastic attacking chance, or it's just the impact that he has on that game for Sydney. It's unbelievable, honestly, and for somebody who relatively inexperienced, like you're saying, Lockie, it's not like he's getting a huge amount of minutes, right? It's just every time he does get a chance, he puts it in the back of the net, or he sets something up, or he gets a good opportunity to shoot. I think it shows, the raw talent that he has, right? That he's able to create and be a part of these chances just so consistently. Like you said, a goal every 90 minutes. That's an insane stat for a striker to have, let alone somebody who's been playing. He's been playing in the centre, he's been playing out wide, he's been played in the midfield a couple of times, right? Yes, he's had few minutes, but he's also had minutes all over the park, and he's still putting up these numbers. So, look, he's probably at the top of my list for the next player who's going to be making a move overseas at this point, because you just can't ignore these sort of numbers, because just mind blowing how good he has been for them, and those two strikes in particular against Auckland. I mean, that first one was an absolute rocket. It's just that's what I'm saying, right? He just pulls it relatively out of nowhere. He's got a bit of time and a bit of space to take that shot, but just the way in which he hits it is almost sort of nonchalant, and it just flies into the far corner, and it's like, yeah, okay, of course. It just makes sense for him. And of course it goes in the back of the net, and there's nothing the keeper can do about it. It's insane how good he is. And Sydney have a real player on their hands. I don't know. Do we know what his contract situation is like? Because
question.
If he's got some years on it, Sydney could be in for a big payday. But if not, they're going to be rushing to try and get him signed up for sure.
I've got a feeling that he's off contract. I could be wrong.
Oof. That's
little
huge.
Google. Transfer Market says he's off contract at the end of the season. So not always 100%
So they could be losing him for nothing.
How about this? I'll ask another question. I'll do a little bit more research. Christian, it was a good second half turnaround right from Auckland. I think it was 2-1 at halftime. They almost got the winner as well. Hamish Devonish-Mears did his best to throw it away. I thought he's actually had a pretty good run the last month or so after struggling a little bit early doors. But that was something else that era, almost very costly.
It's one of those ones where you got to watch back 10 times and think, okay, how on earth did he make that mistake? Like, so he's got the ball, right? And I don't think he looks up. Obviously, he doesn't, right? He doesn't see the player on his left. I think it was May who intercepted it. And it's like, you've got to be aware of your surroundings. Like, that is just such an amateurish mistake at that time of the match. Auckland, 60 seconds before that, almost scored anyway. And they were knocking on the door. Like, you've just got to be switched on. It's just no real excuse. There's no other way of explaining it other than just a complete brain fade.
Yeah.
Well, it's like it's weird as well, because those are the sorts of ones as well where your teammates will be communicating that sort of stuff to you as well, right? Like, they're not going to just ignore the player, the opposition player that's directly behind you. They're going to let you know. And yet, it seems like there was nothing.
He just looks so relaxed.
I don't know, maybe it was miscommunication.
He looks so relaxed.
Yeah, he had no idea he was there.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Well, Adrian Segecic is off contract at the end of the season. I found some media material with that. So Talay said they'd love to keep him, but that surely there's no way, right? Surely there's plenty of people coming into him.
He's got to get an offer somewhere. It's like, you can't ignore these. He's tied top of the Golden Boot standings, and he doesn't start. What is going on?
Well, in terms of other teams who came in with a good run of form and have maintained that as well, the Western Sydney Wanderers, Christian, they're unbeaten since January now, which is wild. Even more so, they've won now 4 home games in a row, which is completely crazy because they'd almost gone a year, I think, before that without winning a game at home. It's the first time that they have that 4-game streak at Parramatta since 2015. So that's a pretty good omen for them. It's funny how the conversation has changed. I just was thinking about this earlier today. They're winning games and all of a sudden you kind of forget that Juan Mata's sitting on the bench and not really having much of an impact.
Yeah.
It's an interesting comparison to earlier in the season. But they showed a different side of themselves again this week. Like, they weren't their absolute best going forward, which is okay. Obviously, you have the error from Sutton, which helped them out, but an absolutely mammoth defensive effort. And I love that moment between Pantazopoulos and Milanovic, like that big chest bump after the big defensive effort, right?
Chest bump,
like
yeah.
they've pulled together lots of different facets of their game now.
Definitely. Hey, I predicted the Wanderers to make first, and everyone laughed at me. And now we're starting to see the real Western.
But they're not first yet, are they, Christian? Come on.
They're coming. No, they're obviously not going to make first, but they're a real contender, obviously, now to at least make second. This run that they've had recently has just been remarkable. Like, a few games in, to be honest, I sort of wrote them off. I thought, okay, that's a terrible prediction as always, Christian. And I thought, okay, probably going to be missed out on finals and they won't make it. But they just have so much, I guess, versatility. They can beat teams in a few different ways. I mean, even when Mata was starting to slowly get back into the team after, those comments from Kalfala, at least Stajic was able to implement him into the side somewhat, even though I think deep down, probably originally, he didn't really have him in his plans, moving forward. But obviously now with Mata on the bench, not even getting a minute against Western United, like I said, they can just play in different ways, right? I mean, I think the past few home games they've had, fewer amount of possession compared to the opposition, yet they're just able to break teams down, right? They're really efficient, I think, in front of goal compared to previous seasons, especially when Marco Rudan was coach. I think that was one of the criticisms where they were getting to good areas. They just couldn't punish teams and get the ball in the back of the net. I think now, Brandon Borrello, the likes of these players, they're really making this season their own. And I think Stats just, obviously put faith in them. And I think they're playing some really good football on top of that. So, how far they can go in finals is, remains to be seen. But in terms of, how they've sort of steered the ship in the right direction, given that there was quite a bit of turmoil, I think, behind the scenes, a lot of questions about, is Stajic the right man? There were rumours about him getting the sack midway through the season, and for him to turn it around as he has done, it's kudos to him.
Well, I am going to ask the question, Jacob. It's a slightly facetious one because at this point in the season, everything is changing so quickly. But what do we rank their chances of winning the championship? Because ever since January, really, there's kind of always been another question on top of whatever their recent success was. But it feels like they kind of worked their way down the checklist and ticked a lot of those boxes, right? And look, winning obviously against Western United, that's another team that's vying for that second spot. I still rate Melbourne City as well. I'd probably consider the Wanderers on par with them in terms of being the one behind Auckland that I would back for the toilet seat.
Yeah, I might actually put them slightly ahead of City, just because I think that there's something about the Wanderers where it's a little bit more dynamic. I think, Christian, you touched on it slightly there, where you said they can win in different ways. Like we've seen here, they can just grind out a result with a defensive effort if they need to. They can also put 5 past somebody and kill the game off completely. Whereas with City, it does sort of feel like they still have to play their way and really control possession of the game and sort of almost suffocate opposition, which is all well and good because they've been doing that this season. But I think that when it comes to finals, sometimes you just need that little bit of explosiveness that can come out of nowhere that the Wanderers kind of possess, and I think that might actually help their chances out a little bit more. So yeah, I definitely put them up there as they're definitely challenging Auckland, even with the way that Auckland have been playing recently. We saw a little bit, and Christian, you touched on this, a little bit of a mentality shift for Auckland in the game, where it was like they feel like they might be coming back into it a little bit. But yeah, I'm gonna say that they are ahead of City, but still just behind Auckland, I reckon.
It's a tough one. I probably agree with Jacob. I can't really disagree with anything you've said there. I think Auckland, considering taking the season as a whole, you'd have to say Auckland are the favourites at this moment in time. But if you're going off recent form, the Wanderers, I think, probably are a touch ahead of City. I'm just thinking like a one-off final. I just think Auckland would have a bit too much if they were to face in the grand final. But yeah, we know form's everything, right? I think the Wanderers have really played themselves into it at the right moment. Right, they've sort of put their struggles to the past. It seems like a distant memory that we've been talking about their defensive frailties. It's like, oh, it's all well and good, everything's fixed. So we'll wait and see whether those problems arise again, whether they play a side like Auckland. I know they stole a point off them a couple of weeks ago, so obviously they're going to have confidence there. But yeah, I mean, Melbourne City as well, they've impressed me all season, especially given the adversity that they've suffered with all the injuries that they've picked up. And to Vidmar's credit, he's done incredibly well to galvanise the group and keep them playing the football that he wants them to. As Jacob said, possession-based football, try to dominate games. But again, I agree with Jacob, like in a final, a one-off game, you're going to have to win a game in a couple of different ways, right? And are City capable of doing that? We'll have to wait and see.
I think it's quite funny as well. Maybe funny is not the right word, but you've got these two head coaches in Vidmar and Stajic who coming into the season, there's a lot of question marks about them, and are they up for the task for these two big clubs with these big aspirations and things. And then Stag was viewed very much as a sort of stopgap on a 1-year contract just to see it out and start the rebuilding process and things. And it's like, now these are the guys at the helm of the two most informed clubs in the league. Like, I just think that's kind of a funny little coincidence that it's these guys where everything's been against them from the start that have been able to get things going for their sides. I don't mind
that comparison. Of course, City had a win over Brisbane as well on Friday night. Marco Tilio continuing his very good run of recent form. Asuma Abubakar is a nice little side plot, I think, in this game as well, getting another goal early on, another opener as well. I believe they only signed him to the end of the season, so he's one definitely to look out for Raw fans in terms of keeping him in the game for next season. Look, Christian, I want to move on to the F3 Derby. It's a game that, because of all the top 6 stakes that were kind of on the line in other games around the leagues, it was probably not the most high-profile F3 going into it. But boy, did Newcastle turn it on. It was their first F3 win in the Hunter Valley for 5 years, which is a funny effort. But Central Coast obviously didn't make things easy for themselves with the red card for Storm Roo. An absolute horror day out for him, getting subbed on for the injured Mikhail Docker and then swinging his elbow into Callum Timmins, so he's out for the game. So the Mariners made to play with 10 men for an hour, and the Jets did not let up.
Yeah, to their credit, like you said, they just kept the foot on the pedal. And given the past few weeks, both teams' form, like this isn't surprising, right? I know the Mariners got the red card late in that first half, and obviously that changes the complexion of things. But like the Jets, the way they played their football, the way they've gone about it recently, they've been just really refreshing. Compared to some of the things they dished up, in the first few games of the season, I think they've really, turned the corner despite all the coaching drama in the background that can be, so easily, distracting for players. To think, okay, this coach isn't going to be here after the next season. What's the point of putting in a shift? But no, to their credit, they've been really good. And this game as well, like it's a derby, right? You need to be up for these games. And for the Mariners, it's just the story of their season, right? They just haven't been up to it. All the way back from when they played in Asia to domestically. I mean, Mark Jackson said a few things in his press conference, just sort of highlighting, I guess, his disappointment, the way that his players approached it. And I guess from his point of view, he just wants the season to end because it just seems as though he just can't find any way now to get anything out of this side. Like it's almost like he squeezed the last bit of juice from the end of the last season out of this squad, and he can't get anything else out from him, which is a shame because of the football they played last season. It was, the story, obviously, of last season, winning the treble, and now to get to this point, such a low point. But, I mean, for the Jets, Eli Adams, scoring that brace, like he's been a player who's just been, revolutionised, I guess, in the sense since leaving Victory. He's really taken, the pressure on, being one of those main guys up front, even being of such a young age to really, lead the Jets attacking line. He's been great. So I think, Jets are 4 points behind 6, I believe. Do they have a chance? I mean, maybe. With 3 games to go, it's probably going to be a bit unlikely, considering the fixtures and run of games they've got. But it's going to be rough. But I think, like the Jets, they haven't laid down, right? They've given themselves every ounce of opportunity that there is to really chase down this top 6. It might be a bit too late, but given this performance in the derby, I think it'd give them at least a bit of belief that they still are with a bit of a sniff.
Well, they might be a little bit late to get into the top 6, but I'm sure as everyone was well aware of going into this game, this was a massive 6-pointer to avoid the Australia Cup playoffs up in Darwin, which we have a little bit more news on later on, actually. But that was obviously not the most important thing here. It's a derby, Jacob. You always want to win. But it also feels like these two teams, they're coming into the end of the season, and we can talk in similar lines of Perth Glory a little later on as well. But mostly what fans are looking for is just some reason for optimism, some way to feel positive about their side heading into what is going to be in a long preseason and plant those first seeds of, I guess, opportunity for the next campaign. And a 6-0 win against your bitter rivals is a pretty good way to do that for Newcastle, even with the uncertainty of who's going to coach us next season.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right, is that it's they're playing all this great football, but the coach that's been the one to guide it is not going to be there next season. So it's perhaps a little bit of a worry there. But no, I mean, there's clear talent in this squad. And, we've really seen it since, January. They've been on fire and playing some fantastic football and getting great results. And this just to put the cherry on top. 6-0 is unbelievable. And I'll come back to what you said, where it's, the Jets didn't let the Mariners get away with playing with 10. They were like, this is an opportunity to go full throttle and really stamp the foot down. And that's exactly what they did. So it's full credit to them. And, you could tell that they had pride in being out there and putting in that sort of a performance, which, for a side that realistically, yes, okay, let's avoid the playoffs as being really the only thing they can play for in that situation. To be able to go and put out that performance and take pride in it, I think that's awesome. And it shows that there's a mentality among the squad that maybe hasn't been there in the Jets in recent years, where, you know, it does feel like they want to win, they want to play good football, and they really like playing together, which, you know, in Jets seasons in the past, they've had, you know, one or two standout players, but it feels like the rest of the squad hasn't really bought into the talent that's there, whereas I think that's kind of changed this season, which is really exciting for them. So yeah, I think it's spot on there, Lockie, where it's, you know, there are silver linings here for Jets fans heading into next season, and, you know, obviously they've been burnt before many times, and, you know, it's been such a long time since they've had decent success. Obviously that season where they made it to the grand final was, what is it now, 8 years, or am I bad at maths? 7 years, something like that.
17, right? I think 17, so 8 years.
We're all bad at maths, clearly. I mean, but no, it's
2018, I think. Yeah.
8 years, but you know, that's a long time in football, and you know, there's, like I said, there's clear signs that there's something in this squad where they can go on and achieve it. So, you know, fingers crossed that they can keep the core of the squad together, and really supplement that in the off season with some, you know, good signings that are going to really help bolster things, because, you know, when they're playing football like this and they're getting these sorts of results, okay, yes, against 10 men, but, you know, they still managed to get 6 goals against 10 men and really put the hammer down. So, you know, they're playing fantastic football, and they're a decent side. So I think that there's plenty of optimism that fans can take moving into next season for sure.
So another thing that happens when we get towards the end of the season, Christian, is that we start thinking about players that, you know, like Adrian Segecic, as we were talking about, could get a move overseas. And for me, watching this Melbourne Victory Phoenix game over the weekend, one of the biggest takeaways was that there is absolutely 0% chance that Nishan Valupale and Ryan Teague are at Melbourne Victory next season. I think ever since Nish got in that Socceroo shirt, he's just been like a completely different player. He missed a little bit with injury, but when he's been on the field, he's looked 10 foot tall. He's just a new level of confidence about him. The little deft finesse kind of finish, you know, in this one to get his goal was brilliant. Ryan Teague's been great for 2 seasons, right? We know his quality. And, you know, we kind of talked about this theme at the start of the season for Victory. It's like, this is a squad that they need to cash in on. And they're running a risk of not doing that because players like Nish and Ryan, there's no way that they don't have interest going overseas at the end of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I think those Socceroos call-ups for them both have definitely, you know, I guess increased their transfer price in a sense. And you're right, Victory do have to make the most of it while they can. Otherwise, you know, you let these types of high-quality players go for free, and all of a sudden, it's obviously less cash flow to plan ahead for, you know, future transfers to try and replace these sorts of caliber players. So, yeah, I think there's always been questions around, okay, Nish, we obviously know he's got the potential, right? It's, can he just keep doing it week in, week out? And, you know, I think all of us here on the pod, you know, some week or another have raised those doubts to say, okay, yeah, he scores all these goals in the Australia Cup pre-season. He has these good patches here and there, but can he sustain that form time and time again? And if he does make that move overseas, which I'm sure he will at season's end, because he does deserve it based off, you know, those performances, it's only a matter of can he do it consistently? That's going to be the real question. Is he going to, you know, face challenges, obviously at a different club abroad? Because, yeah, there's just been times, not only this season, but the previous couple of seasons where, you know, he has a few good games and then the coach drops him back to the bench. He has to prove himself again. It's just this constant cycle, right? Whereas I think Ryan Teague, you sort of know what you're going to get from him a bit more. He's just really right in that midfield. He's just helped Victory so much. Going back to last season under Popovic, it's someone who Popper really relied on right in the middle of the park, and that's obviously a result of why he received that call up against China in the last international window. So definitely, I think, you know, if I'm a European club, you know, looking at Victory and scouting, I'd definitely take Teague over Nish. But you're right, I think both of those players definitely, it seems rather inevitable that both of them will be departing for whoever it may be. But again, they do deserve it because they've been two of, you know, arguably the top players Victory have had over the past 12 to 24 months.
A lot of people I know will consider Ryan Teague and Jordy Balladon as probably one of the best partnerships in midfield in the league as well. So There's plenty of talent coming out of Victory, that's for sure. On the other side of the coin, from the Wellington perspective, Jacob, the future of Giancarlo Italiano will be a big source of conversation. I reckon for the next month or so. David Dome, who's the general manager of the Phoenix, did an interview during the week, and he's saying, in terms of both of the men's and the women's teams that have underperformed, I guess, compared to their expectations, they're already towards the end of some sort of season review process. So a decision probably on Paul Temple will come first, but Chiefy soon after. Apparently he's presented to the football department on, how this season played out and more or less just putting it into perspective and talking about the lessons learned and stuff. But the argument to keep him, I think, is, perfectly summarised in that first goal that Wellington scored on the weekend. The one that Corbin Piper finished off. It's absolute textbook Italiano, play out from the back with very specific intent to draw out a press from the opposition, manipulate their positioning so that there's space in behind, and then just get a few solid passes together until you can find that release ball and take advantage of the numbers, which is exactly what they did. By the time they were streaming forward with Barbarousas there, they were 4-on-3 against Victory. Like, how often do you get that kind of numbers advantage going forward? And then, that little cut back into a good scoring position. That's just absolutely, 100% what Chiefy is about. And that's what you get if you decide to keep him, right? Obviously, there's drawbacks as well. They've played some pretty bland football at time when those opportunities haven't presented themselves. And it's really tough for Knicks fans, I think, coming off the success of last season down to what they are today. Do you think Chiefy has a life at the Phoenix? Will he get a second berth?
Ooh, look, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't do it. Obviously, last season we saw what he can do, and he has the pieces in the squad that he needs to be able to play the way that he wants to play. We've spoken a lot about the outgoings that there have been, and the incomings perhaps haven't been up to standard, and there's not been many of them anyway, right, for him. He's had to make do with a threadbare squad this season, and yet he's still at times got them playing, passages of play like that, which is, as you said, textbook exactly what he wants to be doing. You also see last season, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that not the best season that the Phoenix have ever had in their history as a club? So you've got this coach here who is definitively the best coach you have ever had. It feels like a Western United John Aloisi situation. Do you back this guy who can produce results through a tough period of time and hope that in a couple of years' time, as he builds that squad back up to where it needs to be to compete, he can then be at the front of the table again, at the top of the table, which is exactly what Aloisi has done this year with Western United, right? Or do you cut your losses now and try and avoid a situation that some of the other clubs in the league, Adelaide, have found themselves in, where it's not just, an off season, it's a proper downturn in form, and they're not going to be able to actually, ride it out and correct this and turn back in the right direction. It's a really difficult decision to be to have to make, and a tough position to be in for the club. But I say back him, to be honest. I'm don't hide that I'm a big fan of him and what he's trying to do in the football he tries to play. I think it's awesome. It's innovative. It's bringing something new to the A-League, and he's got that flexibility and tactical adjustments he can make, and it's all fantastic, really promising stuff. But it is very reliant, on having that caliber of player that's able to pick those things up relatively easily and be able to make those adjustments mid-game and have the IQ and the ability to do those things. So, it comes down to where the Phoenix think that they deserve to be. Do they think that they deserve to be at the top of the table and push through some poor results to build a squad back up to get there? Or do they think that, hang on, that's perhaps out of reach compared to the spending ability that some clubs like your Sydneys and your Wanderers and your Victories and your Cities can do? Maybe let's just aim for finals, and we'll bring in somebody who's perhaps going to have a little less volatility in terms of the performances he might put out there, but we might make the six, every season and just scrape into finals. Like, it's really about where they think they want to be as a football club. And I doubt that there's anybody in charge of a football club that doesn't want to be at the pointy end and competing for things. So I think that they should back him. But you can also completely understand, given the football that they've played and the results they've had this season, that you might just be better off cutting your losses and trying something new.
Well, Christian, according to David Dome, they are a team that doesn't have the biggest budget in the league, but certainly doesn't have the smallest one either, which would put them around the mid pack and being one of those teams where you want to be at minimum challenging for finals every single season. And that is essentially a KPI that Italiano has, failed to complete this year.
Yes, but do you base it off one season, or do you go back to last season and what he achieved? Like you both said, like the best season in the Phoenix history. It's not like it's proven that he can't do it, because he has, right? Only 12 months ago, like they were on cloud nine. Like the fans were getting behind them. They were getting almost, sellouts. I think tactically it shows that with a limited amount of time and resources, because I think last season in the transfer window, correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't sign, I think, that many high quality profile players.
Marco Rojas, Paulo Retre were probably the biggest names there.
Last season.
And then Rojas was injured most of the season. So
I think you just got to give him time, right? Because I think he's all obviously tactics driven. It's, a lot of focus goes into, those areas, right? He has to, be with his players. I wouldn't say a lot of the time, because last season, again, he proved that with, limited time, he can, turn his team around into a finals and a championship contending team. We saw that, right? And I think he approaches games in different ways. Like we were talking before with the Wanderers, they can win in different ways, right? He takes, factors playing, for example, away from home. Like he approaches his tactics differently to oppose of, the home fixtures because of travel implications. So he takes just a little 1%ers that makes his team so good. It's just in terms of this season, for one reason or another, that the team just haven't bought into it, right? And I think he said in his press conference after the game against Victory on the weekend what the biggest learning this season from his side, and he admitted, he's like, you can have all the best training sessions, you can do all the right things, you can implement all the tactics, but if your team isn't switched on, if the players aren't buying into what you're doing, then you can have all the best tactics, but it's going to account for nothing, right? So I think he's going to take a lot away from this season. He's the type of manager who he'll learn from his mistakes. He'll take everything on board, the criticism, everything, and he'll try and improve this squad for next season if he gets the chance to do so. And that's the big if, right? Whether he does get that chance to get a second chance and to prove himself. But again, he did it last season, so there's no reason why he can't do the same thing again.
I hope he does stay. I don't think he will. That's where I kind of sit on it at the moment. I tell you what wasn't out of the Chiefy playbook though. That I know it was offside anyway, but that open goal miss from Hideki Ishige would have absolutely been a contender for the miss of the season. I almost think it's worse than those ones that are like, oh, it's 3 foot away and it's impossible to miss the goal. But just a little bit of bubble and yes, you're so close, but you actually have to make good connection and it skies up.
And you kind of get under it.
Yeah, it's like this one, well, you actually had a moment and the goal was empty, Hideki. So I think you should have done a little bit better there. But in terms of other coaches that are kind of on the chopping block towards the end of this season, Jacob, David Drilic certainly did his chances no harm for his post-season review with 4-1 win over Adelaide United. Despondent Adelaide United. Perth climbing off the foot of the table with this one. And, we've talked about setting yourself up for a good preseason and even just optimism in the fan base. Winning their final game at home, of the season is so important.
And finishing the season with an average attendance of 6,500, considering the performances they've been putting in as well. It's, the fans, they clearly love the club and they want the success there. So, that's an off-field positive to bring in. But in terms of Drilic himself, the rumour going around is that he will still be around next season. There's going to be changes at the board level and the governance level at the club. And, fans obviously have very mixed opinions about that. Most of them towards the negative of not being all that pleased with the way that Drilic has set his sides up so far this season. But this is a performance that shows what they can do, right? And when you've got somebody like Adam Taggart up front, who is just such a reliable goal scorer, it's, I was saying it, I'm pretty sure in the Friday episode last week, where I was saying, it's Adam Taggart against Adelaide, he will score goals. Like, it's just, you've got somebody there who can do that and who can produce those moments like that first goal.
What a cheeky little finish.
with a little deft touch and things like that. It's like if you've got a player like that you can really target, that's such a huge benefit. I think it's just been the cohesion of the squad this season has been really poor, and the tactics have been a bit muddled because, okay, he admitted at the start of the season that really high pressing Leipzig type football out of possession wasn't going to work with the squad that he had, and they weren't quite up for it. And so then sort of since then he's tried all sorts of stuff to find what might work with the squad, and nothing's quite stuck. So I think, you know, he didn't necessarily have that plan B of going, right, if this doesn't work, we'll move to this. It was I'm going to buy fully into this. Oh, hang on, it's not working. And then a bit of panic stations to find something that does. So yeah, it's clear the club at least seem to have bought into it, if these rumours are to be believed, and that he will be back for next season. So perhaps with an off season under his belt as well, maybe bring some players in to try and help things out. We'll see a different team out there and some different results. But this is a good performance from this side. They were clinical. They absolutely dominated that second half of the game. Adelaide were dead and buried after half time, and Perth put them to the sword, and it was a very impressive effort considering, you know, sort of the story of the season for these two sides. It's, you know, if you'd have said to Perth at the start of the season after, you know, 5-6 rounds and said you're going to beat Adelaide 4-1 at home, you know, towards the back end of the season, they would not have believed you. But now it's like, yeah, and they've done it, and they've played well to do it as well. So no, a very good performance from them. And yeah, it looks like Zrilic will be around again. Make of that what you will. But, you know, maybe this might inform the Italiano decision, right? Do they stick with him? Seeing Perth doing the same with their under fire manager.
Yeah, perhaps. Just on that Adam Taggart goal, Christian, it's probably good for us just to have a little bit of a reminder of his quality, right? Because he obviously hasn't got the numbers that he would have wanted this season. That is obviously because of the team that he's played in, rather than any specific drop in form from himself, because he's looked good with the opportunities that have been presented for him. And just that goal scorer's instinct to kind of know how you need to shape your body when a ball comes in at an awkward angle to tuck it away like that. I know we probably all didn't quite agree with his selection for the Socceroos, but it's things like that which make you understand the reasoning for it.
Yeah, his IQ is off the charts, right? I mean, you can criticise him all you want, but in terms of the A-League, and especially for Perth, he's just been so instrumental for them, right? Like you said, the way he had to adjust his body, I think it's not a matter of, you know, having to, I guess, you know, learn the craft, you know, for years and years. I mean, it's something that can be instinctive. It's a striker's instinct. It's just, you just can't teach it sometimes, and that's just one of those skills where you just need to know when to execute it. And in that moment, he was just, he pulled it off right. It just shows his class and his quality. It's just, you know, in terms of the Socceroos, you raised the point, Lockie, there has been a couple of questions as to why he is in the squad. And look, I'm one of those people. I don't necessarily agree that he should be in it compared to other players like a Noel Botic who probably do deserve a chance. I mean, how many chances has Taggart had, right? You know, in my view, you can only have so many opportunities before, you know, you got to give the chance to the next person in line. But I think, yeah, he does offer a lot of stuff off the ball. It's just, especially for Australia, he can't score goals, and that's been the main problem for the national side. And it's frustrating because he's playing for a very poor Perth side, albeit they have improved, and you know, he's been able to, you know, somewhat carry the team and score those goals for them, and you know, be up there contending for golden boots. And it's like, why can't you transform that sort of goal scoring form into the national team? That's what gets fans so frustrated. So I mean, I think, you know, moving forward, that's probably a question for Popovic, whether, you know, he sticks by Taggart. Obviously, he does see the qualities in him. That's why he called him up in the last window. And there's no denying that he does have those good qualities of a natural number 9 and centre forward. It's just, you know, can he score goals regularly for Australia like he does for Perth? Like, that's the main question for fans, really.
Well, Perth Glory have 2 games left to go in their A-League campaign, but Jacob, that, as it turns out, will not be the end of their season. Football Australia confirmed on Monday that the Australia Cup playoffs are going back to Darwin, but crucially, in a extremely different points in the season. So the bottom four teams, when they finish in round 29, their campaign won't be over. They're going to play some midweek cup football during the A-League men's final series. So the two playoff games that we know of, the bottom four, 2 games, and then if you win those, you qualify for the round of 32 in the Australia Cup. With Auckland in the Cup this year, the top 9 teams from the A-League all go through to the round of 32. So these playoff games, instead of being played in July, very, very early in pre-season, which doesn't have any kind of similarity with what we kind of rock up with at the start of the A-League campaign, will instead be played on the 13th and 14th of May, which is the Tuesday and Wednesday between the elimination finals and the first leg of the semi-finals of the A-League men's competition. I don't mind this change, Jacob. I think if we can have something akin to like relegation playoffs, it's not really that impactful, of course, but it still has that pride element about it. We're going to get, the 4 worst teams of the competition. They're going to want to prove that they're not quite as bad as everyone else, right? So there is a lot of pride on the line with something like this. And I think it is better than having it in this kind of just nothing period in July where we're not going to get any good football really anyway.
And if correct me if I'm wrong here, but is this not what it was like originally, where it was at the end of the season?
They have flipped around a bit, but like never in the middle of finals.
Yeah. It's much earlier. Yeah, no, I like it. But you mentioned it. Does it really matter? But I think that what we don't appreciate is the fact that the Australia Cup is actually a really good thing for the preseason for these clubs, because they're games that there is actually something to kind of play for. You're not just playing these meaningless friendlies over and over again. As the team that you're coming up against is gonna want to perform, especially if they're an NPL club, right? They want to put on a show and they want to beat that A-League side. So it can actually be a really good test of the squad and your tactics and what you're going to do coming into the A-League season. So, I don't think that clubs should, and I don't think they do, underestimate the importance that the Australia Cup can have on those pre-season preparations. And obviously it's another chance at winning silverware. You don't have to be, consistently fantastic in the Australia Cup to make the final like you do have to be in the league, right? It's much shorter competition. It's knockout. You just go game at a time and you can get your way through. So, I think that there's definitely something to play for now for these bottom 4 teams. It doesn't really change things all too much in terms of the regular season, right? Because, I mean, if you're going to be in the bottom 4, you kind of know you're going to be in the bottom 4. It's not like it's bottom 2 where you can try and crawl your way out of it or anything like that. It's a pretty big chunk of the teams. But it's, at least once the season is over, you've got kind of a reverse finals in a way, right? And there is still something more to kick on with, and something to play for. So no, I'm a big fan of it. I've always enjoyed it, and yeah, it's just that added little bit of edge that you need sometimes to make these games matter and give these teams something to go for, and also final chances, right, for coaches and stuff to reevaluate where their squad is at heading into that off season. Going right, this is really your last chance now, guys. Like if you want to show up and you want to prove your spot in the squad for next season, you got to do it now. It's no longer a case of, the season is done, we're going to be spooners, there's 2 games to go, who cares? It's right, there's 2 games to go, let's see it out, and then in the playoffs we play out of our minds, we win those games, and those of you who perform well, you've got your spots for next season and stuff like that. So yeah, there's more to play for. I think it's a good thing in general.
A little bit of cut down of holiday time, Christian, though. I'm sure the clubs would have had a little bit of prior knowledge of this, but I'm sure it wouldn't have been a fun Monday morning when some of these players are saying, actually you got to hold around for another couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I do agree with what Jacob said, especially that last point of having to prove yourself, right? Especially some of these fringe players, before the season starts, obviously, the following season. It's like it gives them a chance to, show what they're about, gives them a chance to prove to the coach that they belong. And, it gives the coach, a few options in their head to say, okay, this player, perhaps we need to try and move him on, or it can experiment in different positions, right? Because albeit they're coming up against opposition that obviously they're not going to underestimate them, but at the same time they can still put in a few experiments and see where their team's out compared to if they played the fixtures later on down the line. So I definitely think it's a good thing. But yeah, in terms of the holiday aspect, some players have to be on holiday mode a bit later on, unfortunately.
One extra just little piece to this. I would not be surprised if that Wednesday game, the 14th of May, if that is the redundancy semi-final, if Sydney FC make it and are in the ACL2 final. I know that's looking unlikely, more unlikely than it was last week, but I think that Wednesday being in between the two games, we might have a double header, which obviously this is Football Australia, A-League is APL, so they don't have to look out for each other that much, but could have a double header on that Wednesday night. Could be interesting. Finally, for today, we have been following the Joeys. Unfortunately, they are out in the groups of their under-17 Asian Cup in some quite dramatic circumstances. They had a comeback 3-2 win over Japan, somehow beating easily the highest-ranked Asian nation in the competition. And then at 80, so at that point, obviously the games were played simultaneously, but a win over Japan probably could have been good enough, but an 87th minute equaliser for the UAE over Vietnam tied the UAE with the Aussies at 4 points, and then who knocked out the Joeys on a head-to-head record. So they won't go through to the knockouts, Jacob. They will not compete in the Under-17 World Cup. Obviously, football is football, but especially coming off the back of those Under-20s and how some players in the squad were talking about the example that they wanted to follow, it's quite disappointing to see them not even make it out of the groups.
Yeah, I'm not disappointed in the performance because getting a 3-2 comeback win over Japan is a tremendous performance. Instead, disappointed in the campaign as a whole to struggle as they did to find results. I think we all went in there with perhaps a little bit not of confidence but of excitement to see what these guys can do, especially with those comments that they were making about following in those footsteps, and just sort of teetered out a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. And I mean, they were still just, 3 or 4 minutes away from just about sneaking through before that equaliser came in, and it's disappointing for sure. I think it's the perfect word to sum it up, because they're missing out on that chance now to head to the World Cup and really play the best of the best in the world. And the Under-17 World Cup, I think I mentioned it last time we were talking about it, it's taken very, very seriously by football associations around the globe. Like they see this as a real testing ground for their young players. So, the fact that Australia won't be there is incredibly disappointing, and perhaps a missed opportunity to help further the development of these young players we have coming through. They're not going to have that opportunity now. So, a real shame. I mean, should be proud in the performance that they had in that game against Japan, but maybe need to look at what they were doing earlier on in the campaign and take some lessons from that moving forwards, because that game against the UAE in particular was extremely disappointing. I thought that they were in with a good shout of putting in a decent performance against them, and they just couldn't get anything done in that one, and then they showed in this Japan game what they can do. So it's a lot of up and down, a lot of inconsistencies, mirroring perhaps a lot of the performances of some of these guys' clubs in the A-League this season, which might be an excuse that they'll use or something like that. But no, disappointing for sure. But it was a good performance all the same in that game against Japan. It's a bit of a weird thing to say, but I think that's
and it is tough, Christian, because they hit the woodwork like 3 or 4 times in the game against the UAE. They had the penalty goal that appeared to cross the line overruled in the first one, which could have made it a 2-1 win. And, all of a sudden things are so different, right? In the same way that the under-20s won the final in a penalty shootout, right? So it is fine margins, but it always seems to happen this way. We get one really good moment and then you just get knocked down just a little bit.
I was about to say, it's just a game of small margins, right? I mean, that shootout in the under-20s final, the Asian Cup, it can go either way, right? And then even before that, there were a couple of close calls, and even in this game, like you mentioned, hitting the woodwork so many times, it just goes to show that if the ball's not going in the back of the net, it's just not your day, right? And for the Joeys, it's unfortunate because they did put in a positive showing against Japan, right? Like one of our rivals who we've looked up to from the youth down to the senior team. Like we've wanted to eclipse them, for so many years, and we're slowly, I wouldn't say catching up to them, but the gap isn't falling, right? I think it's fair to say that at least that we're remaining steady, whereas in previous years, Japan just seems to go up a level, up a gear, and we just can't catch up. It seems like the gap is, just staying firm. So at least that's a positive. But to miss out on the Under-17 World Cup, that's obviously the huge disadvantage and disappointment, I guess, because you want to be competing in those major tournaments, right, for that development for the youth to get that exposure at that level. So it's a real shame, but have to move on. There's no option.
All right, very good. That'll do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Jeez, I usually don't get that one wrong. Jacob Stevens, thank you very much. Christian Montegan, cheers.
As always, Lucky.
No worries.
I hope you have fun with your tennis during the week. As we all know, golf is the superior sport upon comparison.
Let's not bring this argument up. Let's
not.
Let's
behind the
not
scenes
go
for
there.
you. That was dramatic. I hope everyone enjoyed their Masters weekend, but we appreciate you joining in. As always, we'll be back on Friday. Sydney FC, don't forget, in action in the Champions League 2 on Wednesday night. And then I look forward to another very important weekend, of course, of A-League football. But thank you again very much for listening. Goodbye.